For the fifth morning in a row she woke up to the same sound, the screech of metal on concrete. Someone was sharpening an improvised blade in a far corner of the barracks. In the women's zone number 17, this meant only one thing. A showdown was being prepared. But this time was different. All 500 women in the barracks watched silently in her direction, waiting for the decision. The one whom a year ago they had pushed into the mud and taken her ration, now held the last word, whether a person would live or not. How the daughter of a country schoolteacher became the Shadow Queen, controlling 5,000 women prisoners in one of the largest correctional camps of the 30s. A story that was told in whispers, even decades later. A story about how, in a place where even the strongest were broken, a woman created her own empire of power. Contemporaries remembered that when, in the year 32, the camp gates closed behind Maria Sergheevna, no one would have bet a penny on her. An intellectual, silent, with round glasses, which they broke on the very first day. The sentence: 10 years for failure to report. Her husband was on the lists of the enemies of the people, and she knew about his views and kept silent. In the women's barracks, such people were called chickens, weak, unadapted, doomed to perish. The first night was a nightmare. A spot on the bunk had to be earned. Experienced inmates immediately identified the new ones by their walk, by their gaze, by how they held their meager bundle of belongings. Maria pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible. But in an overcrowded barrack, where 4 people slept on one bunk, it was impossible to become invisible. "Hey, Four Eyes!" A hoarse voice was heard from somewhere above. "Your place is by the slop bucket. Get used to the smell." Intellectual. The woman who said this was from the criminal underworld. Anna One Eye, as they called her, because of a scar that crossed her whole face. She ruled the barracks with an iron fist. Her word was law. Maria got up silently from the bunk. On the first night, it's better not to argue. She would learn that later. But it was precisely from next to the slop bucket, the most humiliating place in the barracks, that her ascent to power began. Because there, in the corner where the weakest were banished, she met Vera, a former paramedic, convicted for stealing medicine. Vera was dying of pneumonia, and everyone was waiting for her spot to free up so they could take her thick jacket. Maria did what no one expected. She gave her bread ration for access to the stove, heated water, and applied compresses to Vera all night. By morning, the fever had broken. Few noticed this gesture, but among them was the old thief Matriona, who was already serving her 3rd term. "You fool with glasses," she told her, passing by. "Here, your own skin is more valuable." But in her voice, there wasn't the usual malice. Vera survived, and this became the first stone in the foundation of the future empire. Because Vera knew medicine, and in the camp, that was a currency stronger than bread. She could distinguish simulation from real illness, knew which herbs helped with camp diseases, knew how to set dislocations after beatings, and she owed Maria her life. To understand how the women's zone worked, you must forget everything you know about ordinary life. The laws of the jungle operated here, only cruder, because in the jungle, the predator kills to feed, while here, they humiliated for pleasure, to maintain status, and out of fear of ending up at the bottom themselves. The hierarchy was clear, like military regulations. At the top were the blatni, career thieves. They had their own code, their own concepts. They didn't work, lived off the others, settled disputes, set punishments. Below were the mujichki, common criminals who stole out of hunger or foolishness. They worked, but had some rights. And further down were the politicals, kontriki, enemies of the people. And at the very bottom were the opushchenyi, those who had broken the camp laws or simply couldn't defend themselves. Anna One Eye had ruled the barracks for 3 years. Even the guards feared her. It was said she had gotten the scar on her face in a fight with a male criminal back when she was free, and that she, in response, well, let's just say deprived him of the possibility of having children. In the camp, she established her own rules. Every newcomer paid tribute, half their ration in the first week. Whoever refused awaited the registration, a ritual beating, after which the person either broke or didn't survive. Maria avoided the registration, by a miracle. On the first morning, when Anna approached for the tribute, something unexpected happened. Old Matriona, that very thief-in-law, suddenly said, "One Eye, don't touch Four Eyes, she's under my protection." Why did Matriona act this way? Perhaps she saw in Maria's gesture towards the sick Vera something that touched her hardened heart? Or maybe she simply sensed that this silent intellectual could be useful to her. Matriona was special. At her 60 years, she enjoyed undeniable authority among the Blatni. Not because she was cruel, on the contrary, she was renowned for her fairness. If Matriona said, "Don't touch," they didn't touch. If she said, "She's guilty," expect no mercy. She had the gift of seeing right through people, of understanding who was a traitor, who was an honest thief, and who was just an unfortunate person caught in the system's meat grinder. Under Matriona's protection, Maria began to adapt. She quickly understood the main rule of survival: you must be useful. Vera taught her the basics of medicine, and Maria proved to be a capable student. But her main talent became something else: the ability to listen and remember. In a barrack where 500 women lived, secrets were born and died every day. Someone received a package and hid an extra piece of sugar. Someone entered into a forbidden relationship with a guard. Someone was preparing an escape. Maria listened and kept silent. She knew which of the guards had a sick daughter, and Vera, through her, passed on treatment advice. She knew which of the Blatni secretly longed for the child left behind in the free world. She knew which of the politicals was actually innocent, and who was indeed engaged in subversive activities. Information. That was the real power in the camp, and Maria gathered it, just as a miser gathers gold. One night, they brought a new batch to the barracks. Among them was a very young girl, almost a child, about 17 years old. Her name was Ekaterina, convicted for relations with a foreigner. She danced in a restaurant frequented by diplomats. Anna, One Eye, immediately set her sights on her. Not in the way you might think, although that also happened in the women's camps. No. Anna saw the beautiful girl as a way to profit. There were people in the camp who, let's say, organized special services for the camp leadership, and young, beautiful girls were a commodity. Ekaterina cried the whole first night. Maria lay nearby and listened to her sobs. In the morning, the registration was supposed to take place, and everyone knew that after that, Ekaterina would be sent to a special barrack from which few returned, and those who did were permanently broken. The morning began with a scream, a piercing, inhuman scream that woke the entire barrack. Anna, One Eye, was writhing on the floor, clutching her stomach. Foam was coming from her mouth, her eyes were rolled back. A seizure, a poisoning. Panic gripped the barracks. The Blatni bustled around their leader. Someone ran for the medic. Someone tried to pour water into her mouth. Vera appeared. She examined Anna, shook her head. "Intestinal obstruction," she said loudly. "If she's not operated on within an hour, she dies." Surgery in camp conditions was a death sentence. The camp doctor, the drunkard Semyonov, whose hands trembled even when he was sober, wouldn't have attempted such a thing. And then Maria did the thing that changed everything. "I know someone who can help," she said quietly. Everyone turned to her. No one knew that, in recent weeks, Maria, through her channels, those guards with sick relatives, had established contact with a civilian surgeon from the neighboring village. Dr. Voronov, a former military doctor, sometimes operated illegally on inmates for a fee. A very high fee. "How much?" hissed one of Anna's close associates. 2 kilograms of makorka, crude tobacco, and a gold watch, Maria replied. There was makorka in the camp, but the watch. Everyone knew Anna had a stash of valuables, taken from newcomers over her years of rule. But where it was, only she knew. Anna was dying. Her face had turned ashen, her breathing became ragged. And then Maria leaned over her and whispered something in her ear. Anna's eyes widened. She tried to say something, but only bloody foam appeared on her lips. Then she nodded weakly towards the bunk by the window. Under the floorboards, they found a package, gold watches, rings, even a small icon in a silver frame. Maria took only the watch. An hour later, Dr. Voronov, brought secretly through the checkpoint in exchange for a bribe given to a guard, was leaning over Anna in the medic's office. The operation lasted 3 hours. The whole barrack froze in anticipation. If Anna died, The war for power would begin. Several factions were already sharpening their knives, ready to fight for the top spot. And only Maria sat calmly on her bunk, writing something in a notebook, miraculously saved from her time in freedom. Anna survived. But when, a week later, she could speak, something incredible happened. She summoned the entire barrack and said, "Four Eyes saved my life. She is now under my personal protection. Whoever touches her will answer to me." But that wasn't all. "And one more thing," Anna added, staring intently at Maria. "You know everything about everyone in this barrack. I saw your notebook when you leaned over me. You will be my mind. I decide. You think." Thus began a strange partnership. Anna remained the formal leader, the brute force, the threat. But decisions were now made after consulting with Maria, and these decisions were unexpected. First, Maria proposed changing the tax system. Instead of robbing the newcomers, she introduced a kind of insurance. Everyone paid a small part of their ration into a common fund. From this fund, they helped the sick, bribed the guards to ease conditions. The Blatnii revolted. What kind of mutual aid in the zone? But Anna supported the plan, and arguing with Anna was too costly. The second innovation was the labor exchange. Maria found out the skills of every woman in the barrack. It turned out that among the inmates there was a former seamstress, capable of making almost decent clothes from burlap. An accountant, capable of keeping the underground records of the camp economy. A teacher, ready to write letters for the illiterate for a bread ration. Before, these skills were wasted. Now Maria had organized a system of bartering services. But most importantly, she began to gather information not just about the inmates, but also about the administration. Which guard takes bribes? Which boss has mistresses among the civilian employees? Which of the supervisors steals from the camp property? This information became a shield. When the supervisor Kuznetsov tried to rape a young inmate, Maria, through Anna, sent him a message. "We know about your dealings with the supplies. One single denunciation, and you yourself will end up on this side of the bars." Kuznetsov backed off. The spring of '33 brought unexpected changes. A new chief arrived at the camp, Major Derzhavin, sent from Moscow with special powers. It was said his task was to establish order, stop the theft, and increase work productivity. The first thing he did was to conduct an unannounced inspection of all the barracks. In the women's barrack number 17, they found an entire stash of forbidden items, knives, improvised tools, even a primitive samagon, moonshine still. Anna and 10 other Blatni were sent to the solitary confinement cell. But they didn't touch Maria. Officially, she was nobody, just a quiet political prisoner. 10 days of solitary broke many. Anna returned a different person. The cold, hunger, and loneliness had taken their toll. She could no longer lead by force. She no longer had the strength. And then the first coup attempt took place. A group of young thieves, led by Nina, nicknamed the Plague, decided their time had come. The fight began at night. Nina and her acolytes surrounded Anna's bunk. "Time to change the leadership, old woman," Nina hissed. Anna tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't hold her after solitary. And then, what no one expected, happened. Maria stood between them. "There will be no fight," she said calmly. Nina burst out laughing. "Four Eyes has decided to play the hero. Move aside while you're still in one piece." But Maria didn't move. "If you touch Anna, tomorrow the whole camp will find out how you turned in your accomplice on the outside, just to get a lighter sentence." Silence fell. How did Maria know? This was a secret Nina had kept for years. If the Blatni found out she was an informer, they would simply kill her, and the guards wouldn't intervene. "She's bluffing," Nina hissed, but there was no longer any confidence in her voice. Maria pulled a folded paper from her bosom. "A copy of your file. Page 14, third paragraph. Do you want me to read it aloud?" How she obtained the document from the personal file remained a mystery. Maybe someone from the administration, whose relative Vera had saved, helped her. Maybe Maria found another way, but the fact remained. She had information capable of destroying anyone. Nina backed down, but Anna's power was definitively undermined. And then the old thief made an unexpected move. She convened the Shodka, the gathering of all the authoritative inmates in the barrack. "I'm stepping down," she said simply, "but I'm naming a successor. Four Eyes is the boss now." The explosion of outrage was deafening. A political? An intellectual? She doesn't even know the thieves can't. But Anna raised her hand, demanding silence. "She saved my life. She knows things about every one of you that can destroy you. And she's smarter than all of us put together. Either you accept her, or, before I leave, I'll turn over all your schemes and stashes to the cops." It was an ultimatum. Anna still commanded enough authority for her threat to be real. The thieves looked at each other. The first to speak, unexpectedly, was old Matryona. "So what? Let her try. If she can't handle it, we'll deal with her." And so Maria became the unofficial leader of the barracks. But this was only the beginning, because leading 500 women, each of them ready to cut the other's throat for an extra piece of bread, was an almost impossible task. And Maria understood. Information alone was not enough. A system was needed. First, she created a barrack council with representatives from each group of inmates. The blatniye were represented by Matryona, the politicals by the former teacher Elizaveta Pavlovna, and the common criminals by the peasant Daria. Decisions were made collegially, but the final word belonged to Maria. Then she reorganized the underground economy. Before, each faction produced on its own. Someone made samagon, someone played cards, someone stole from the camp warehouses. This led to conflicts and attracted the attention of the guards. Maria introduced a division of spheres of influence and a common fund. A percentage of every operation went into the barracks fund. But the most revolutionary was the creation of a security service. Maria chose 10 of the most trusted women who monitored order, prevented conflicts, and most importantly, gathered information. Every guard, every boss had their own curator from among the inmates who knew everything about them. Major Derjevin was not stupid. He quickly understood that something unusual was happening in the women's barrack number 17. Work productivity had increased by 30%. The number of beatings and violations had dropped to almost zero. Even the sick began to recover faster. For a camp where the norm was hunger, disease, and death, this was an anomaly. He summoned the chief supervisor, Gromova, a tough woman, but not without a practical spirit. "What is happening in Barrack 17? He asked her directly. Gromova hesitated. She knew about Maria's unofficial power, but she was in no hurry to denounce her. Why? Because Maria, through Vera, had cured her daughter of scarlet fever when the local doctors had given up. "There's a new boss there, Comrade Major. One of the politicals, Sergheevna Maria." Derjevin frowned. A political leading the common criminals. This was unheard of. "Bring her to me." The meeting took place the next day. Maria entered the office calmly, without a trace of fear. Derjavin expected to see either a frightened intellectual or an embittered fanatic. But before him stood a woman with a straight back and a clear gaze. "Explain to me what is happening in your barrack," he began without introductions. Maria answered simply, "We are working, Comrade Major, fulfilling the plan. Isn't that what you want?" Derjavin studied her carefully. "It has been reported to me that you have established your own rules there. That is illegal." Maria smiled slightly. "And what is legal in the camp, Comrade Major? The fact that Guard Petrov steals the supplies meant for the inmates, or that the medic Semyonov drinks the medicinal alcohol?" This was a direct challenge. Derjavin could have sent her to solitary, could have transferred her to a punishment barrack, but he was a pragmatist. Barrack 17 was running like clockwork, and that improved his indicators for Moscow. "What do you propose?" And Maria proposed a deal. The barrack would exceed the plan by 50%. In exchange, extra rations, access to medicine, and, most importantly, no interference in the barrack's internal affairs. Derjevin thought for 3 days, then agreed, but with one condition. Any serious incident, and the deal was off. Thus began a strange coexistence. Officially, the barrack lived by the camp rules. Unofficially, Maria had built a parallel system of governance, which worked more efficiently than the official one. But not everyone was happy with the new order. The strongest resistance came, strangely, not from the blatni, but from some of the politicals. Elena Andreevna, a former party activist, convicted under Article 58, considered collaboration with the administration inadmissible. "You are betraying the ideals," she threw at Maria in front of everyone. Maria responded with unexpected harshness. "What ideals, Elena Andreevna? The ones for which you sent half the barrack here when you were free? Or the ones you preach now that you yourself have ended up behind bars?" It was a blow below the belt. Everyone knew that Elena Andreevna, before her arrest, had actively participated in the purges. The conflict was growing. A group of dissatisfied politicals began to agitate against Maria. They spread rumors that she was collaborating with the administration not for the common good, but for personal privileges, that she was passing information about inmates to the leadership, that she was preparing a mass denunciation. The situation reached a boiling point when the camp informer, an inmate named Zoya, whom everyone suspected of snitching, disappeared. They found her in the morning, beaten almost to death. Suspicion immediately fell on Maria's people. It was the ideal pretext for Sergheevna to break the agreement and impose his own order with an iron fist. But Maria anticipated the events. She herself went to Sergheevna with proof that Zoya had not been beaten by her people, but by the group of dissatisfied politicals, led by Elena Andreevna. Furthermore, she presented testimony that Elena Andreevna was planning a murder and preparing an escape, using Zoya's beating as a diversion. Where did Maria get the proof? Her information system worked impeccably. In every group of inmates, she had eyes and ears. Not informers in the usual sense. She didn't turn people over to the administration, but she knew everything that was happening in the barrack, sometimes even before the participants in the events had made a final decision. Elena Andreevna and her accomplices were transferred to the punishment barrack. But this victory cost Maria dearly. Many politicals turned their backs on her, considering her a traitor. She was left with the support of only the common criminals and a small group of devoted people. It was then that the story they retold for years happened. They brought a new batch of inmates to the barracks. Among them was a very young girl, almost a child, Varia, 15 years old. Officially, they had listed her as 18, to send her to the adult zone. She was convicted for stealing a loaf of bread for her starving mother. According to camp laws, such a young and beautiful girl became prey. From the very first evening, those who dealt in live goods began to circle her. There was a special category of women in the camp who served certain needs of both the inmates and the guards. Varia was being prepared for this. Maria intervened personally. She declared Varia her daughter. This meant the highest degree of protection. Anyone who touched her would answer to the entire barrack. But some didn't take this seriously. At night, 3 women tried to take Varia by force. What happened next became legend. Maria didn't call for help. She went out alone against the 3 of them. No one expected the quiet intellectual to know how to fight. But in her years in the camp, she had learned much. Most importantly, she had learned not to fear pain. The fight was short and brutal. Maria used what old Matriona had taught her. Not force, but knowledge of pressure points. 5 minutes later, all 3 attackers were writhing on the floor. "Anyone else want to test my words?" Maria asked, wiping the blood from her split lip. There were no more takers. Varia remained under her protection, and later became one of her most devoted helpers. It was Varia who kept the secret chronicle of the barracks, noting all the events that, much later, helped to reconstruct this story. But the greatest test was yet to come. A commission from Moscow was due to arrive at the camp. A check of the detention conditions, the fulfillment of plans, the general order. For Sergheevna, it was a chance to get a promotion. For the inmates, an opportunity to file complaints that could reach the highest leadership. For Maria, a threat to the entire system she had built. The commission was led by NKVD Colonel Burtsev, a man with a reputation for being incorruptible and cruel. It was said he had personally shot over 100 enemies of the people. He had come with a specific purpose. Rumors had reached Moscow about the strange rules in the women's zone, about the fact that the inmates there were living too well. 1 week before the commission's arrival, Sergheevna summoned Maria. "Do you understand that everything depends on this inspection? If Burtsev finds one violation, we are both in big trouble. They will transfer me to a penal battalion, and you." He didn't finish, but Maria understood. Execution awaited her for organizing an anti-Soviet group. "What do you propose?" she asked. Sergheevna was silent for a while. "Let's temporarily suspend your innovations. Let the barrack live like a normal zone. Hunger, beatings, disease. What the Commission expects to see. Maria shook her head. If we destroy everything now, we will never rebuild. The people will lose faith. Chaos will begin. 3 days remained until the Commission's arrival, when Maria convened an emergency council. We have 2 paths. Either we show the Commission what they want to see, hell on earth, or we take a risk and show the truth, that inmates can live and work like human beings if given a chance. The votes were split. The Blatny were for the first option, less risk. But Vera, old Matriona, and, unexpectedly, a few former politicals supported the second. We are already dead to the outside world, Matriona said. So let's die on our feet, not on our knees. The decision was made. The barrack would show the Commission real life, unembellished, but also not specially worsened. Maria understood it was a gamble, where the stake was life, not just hers, but of everyone who believed in the new system. 2 days before the arrival, an incident occurred that could destroy everything. In the neighboring men's barrack, a riot broke out. The inmates captured 2 guards, demanding better conditions. The crackdown was brutal. 3 were shot on the spot, 10 were sent to punishment cells. The blood on the snow hadn't even been covered by the time the Commission arrived. And here, Maria's true genius manifested. She understood that after the riot in the men's zone, the Commission would be especially suspicious of any deviation from the norm. She had to show not an ideal barrack, but one that functioned correctly. Where problems exist, but they are resolved. Where conflicts exist, but they don't escalate into riots. She instructed the entire barrack. Everyone had to play their part, but without overdoing it. The Blatny remain Blatny, coarse, bold, but not aggressive. The politicals, oppressed, but not broken. And most importantly, no ostentatious friendship between groups. The Commission needed to see a natural tension, which, however, did not spin out of control. On the morning of the arrival, something unforeseen happened. Varia, the little girl under Maria's protection, disappeared. They found her in a remote corner of the territory. Someone had tried to harm her. The girl was in shock, unable to speak. The trail led to guard Petrov, the same one who stole supplies. Time was running out. The Commission was already about to reach the camp, and Maria made a decision that many would later call either genius or insane. She did not hide the incident. On the contrary, when Colonel Burtsev entered the barrack, accompanied by Derjevin and the suite of inspectors, he was met by an unusual sight. The entire barrack stood in absolute silence. 500 women, lined up not by order, but of their own free will. And at the front, Maria, holding the barely alive Varia in her arms. "Comrade Colonel," she began, loud and clear. "I am Sergheevna Maria, the unofficial representative of barrack number 17. 2 hours ago, Guard Petrov committed a crime against a minor inmate. We demand justice." Derjevin turned pale. This was the end of his career. Burtsev slowly scanned the barrack. He did not see a crowd of oppressed women, but an organized force, and something in his gaze changed. "Where is the proof?" he asked curtly. And then, Vera stepped forward with the medical conclusion. Then 3 witnesses who saw Petrov take Varia. Then, and this was the most unexpected, Supervisor Gromova, who confirmed that Petrov had already had such inclinations. Burtsev turned to Derjevin. "Major, why am I learning about this from the inmates, and not from you?" Derjevin was silent. He understood. Maria had just saved him, taking the blow herself. If the scandal had come out later, he would have been accused of a cover-up. But this way, he just looked like an incompetent leader who doesn't know what's happening in his own camp. The inspection lasted 3 days. Burtsev personally interrogated dozens of inmates, and each, following Maria's instructions, told the truth, but a measured truth. Yes, the conditions are hard. Yes, there is arbitrariness from the guards, but the barrack manages, the plan is fulfilled. The mortality rate is lower than in other zones. On the second day, Burtsev summoned Maria for a private discussion. They sat in Derjevin's office. The major had been suspended pending the investigation into Petrov's case. The colonel was silent for a long time, examining the thin woman in her camp clothes. "Do you understand that I can have you shot right now for organizing an anti-Soviet group?" he finally asked her. Maria nodded. "I understand, Comrade Colonel, but But you won't do it. Why do you think that? Because you are an intelligent man. You see that the barrack functions better than any other in this camp. We don't riot. We don't organize escapes. We are just trying to survive, while maintaining our human dignity. Is that a crime? The colonel stood up, walked to the window. Beyond the window was a typical camp view. Gray barracks, barbed wire, guard towers. You know, Sergheevna, I have seen many camps. In most of them, the inmates either turn into animals or they die. You have created a third way. It's curious. He turned back to her. But the system does not tolerate exceptions. If Moscow finds out about your experiment, they will destroy us all. You first of all. Maria was silent, waiting for the verdict. Therefore, Burtsov continued, officially, I have seen nothing. Barrack number 17 is exemplary in fulfilling its production quotas. Period. But he paused. If you do not maintain control, if a revolt or mass escapes begin, I will come personally and there will be mercy for no one. Thus, Maria received an unofficial sanction to continue her experiment. But the price was high. She had to balance between three forces: the camp administration, which demanded the fulfillment of the plan, the criminal underworld, with its cruel laws, and her own conscience, which did not permit her to transform into a tyrant. After the commission's departure, life entered a new phase. Sergheevna was not dismissed. Maria, through Burtsov, managed to keep him. She understood it was better to deal with a known pragmatic than an unknown fanatic. Petrov was shot. This became a warning to the other guards. But the main changes took place inside the barrack. The story with Varia united the women like nothing else. Even those who had previously doubted Maria now recognized her leadership. She had risked everything to save a little girl. In the camp world, this was an almost unbelievable gesture. Maria's power extended beyond the borders of Barrack 17. Women from other barracks began to turn to her. First for medical help, Vera and her pupils treated better than the camp doctors, then for advice in resolving conflicts, then for protection against arbitrary cruelty. By the autumn of 33, 5 women's barracks, almost 3,000 people were already under Maria's unofficial control. She created an entire network of mutual aid. The barrack specialized in sewing clothes exchanged with the laundry barrack. Those working in the kitchen secured extra rations for the sick and weak. But such power generated envy and fear. In the men's zone, talk began to spread that the old women, Babel, had gotten too full of themselves. Some thieves-in-law considered it inadmissible for a political prisoner to command those from the criminal underworld. A conflict was brewing that could destroy everything Maria had built. The winter of 33 came suddenly and mercilessly. The temperature dropped below freezing. In the barracks, water froze. The women slept huddled together, 5 or 6 people at a time, just to keep from freezing to death. Just then, Maria's system faced its true test of endurance. The official ration was cut. Somewhere up high it was decided that prisoners work less in winter, so they should eat less. A monstrous logic, but typical for that time. Famine began. Not just the constant feeling of emptiness in the stomach, which everyone had grown used to, but a true, killing hunger. The old and the sick were the first to die. And then Maria did what definitively consolidated her power, but also put her in the line of fire. She organized what would later be called the Winter Conspiracy. Through her connections among the civilian employees, she organized the smuggling of products into the camp, but not for money or gold. Nobody had those anyway. For information. It turned out that many guards and even some officers in the administration were themselves under suspicion. The times were such. Today you are the inspector, tomorrow you are the inspected. Maria offered them a deal. She would warn them about denunciations being prepared against them, and they would turn a blind eye to the extra provisions for the female prisoners. The scheme worked for 2 months. The women's barracks under Maria's control lost only 12 people over the winter. In the men's zone, by comparison, over 300 died. But in February, everything collapsed. A new political officer, Captain Khrushchev, arrived at the camp. Young, ambitious, fanatically devoted to the party. The first thing he did was an unexpected inspection of the women's barracks, and found what he was looking for. A stash of products. A sack of flour, a few pieces of salo. Cured fat. Even a can of condensed milk for the sick children in the family barrack. According to camp laws, sabotage and embezzlement of state property meant execution by firing squad. Maria was arrested right in the barrack, in front of everyone, but she managed to shout only one word: protocol. This was a conventional signal, which meant switching to Plan B, a plan she had developed in case of her arrest. Within 1 hour of her arrest, the incredible happened. All 5,000 women under her control declared a hunger strike, not a revolt, not an uprising, simply a refusal of food. In the winter conditions and with their weakened bodies, this was equivalent to mass suicide. Khrushchev was enraged. He ordered the strikers to be force-fed. But try force-feeding 5,000 people against their will. Mass faintings began. Several women fell into comas. Production stopped. The hunger strikers physically could not work. On the third day, the same Colonel Burtsev arrived urgently at the camp. The situation was spiraling out of control. If 5,000 prisoners died of starvation, it would be a catastrophe even by Gulag standards. Questions would be asked at the highest level. Burtsev summoned Maria from the punishment cell. She could barely stand, after 3 days in a frozen stone sack, without food or water. "Stop the hunger strike," he ordered. Maria raised her head. "First, cancel the execution order and return the confiscated products to the sick children." "You are bargaining with me." Burtsev was astonished. Even on the verge of death, this woman was dictating terms. "I am saving you from a catastrophe, Comrade Colonel. If the hunger strike continues, mass deaths will begin in 2 days. How will you explain that to Moscow?" The deal was struck. Officially, Maria was punished with 10 days in the punishment cell for violating the regime, a ridiculous punishment compared to execution. The products were returned under the pretext of a planned supplementary ration for those fulfilling the plan. Khrushchev was discreetly transferred to another camp. But this victory changed Maria. 10 days in the cell would have broken many, but not her. However, something in her eyes had been extinguished. Those close to her, Vera, Varia, old Matriona, saw that she no longer believed in the possibility of humanity in that hell. Now she was merely managing survival. The spring of 1934 brought new trials. Massive transports began to arrive at the camp. Dekulakized peasant women, wives of repressed military officers, even a few foreigners, wives of engineers who had come to help build socialism and got caught in the grinder of repressions. The population of the women's zone nearly doubled. With the new transports came new problems. Many women arrived with children. There was a small children's barrack in the camp, but the conditions there were monstrous. Children died of hunger and disease faster than adults. And here Maria did what seemed impossible. She organized a clandestine kindergarten. Officially, it was a production group for repairing clothes, but in reality, a few women with pedagogical training took care of the children, taught them to read and write, told them stories, trying somehow to preserve their humanity. Among the newcomers was a woman who became both a revelation and a curse for Maria. Her name was Olga Nikolaevna. Before her arrest, she had been the wife of an important party official, educated, authoritarian, used to giving orders. She immediately tried to establish her own rules among the political prisoners. The conflict was inevitable. Olga Nikolaevna openly accused Maria of collaboration with the administration. "You have created not a system of mutual aid, but a system of mutual enslavement," she threw out at the general barrack meeting. "Instead of fighting the regime, you are helping it function more efficiently." To some extent, she was right. Maria's system did indeed make the camp easier for the administration to manage, but the alternative was chaos, hunger, and death. Maria responded harshly. "The dead do not fight the regime. Olga Nikolaevna, my task is to ensure that as many women as possible get out of here alive, and your pompous words have not saved a single life." The confrontation deepened. Olga Nikolaevna and her group created their own faction from the newcomers. They refused to participate in the common system, demanding special conditions as victims of political repression. This split the women's zone into 2 camps. The peak was reached in July. Olga Nikolaevna and her group prepared a collective complaint to Moscow about the violations in the camp. But the main thing in the complaint was the accusation against Maria of creating a criminal group. If this complaint had reached its destination, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Maria found out about the complaint one day before it was to be sent. She had several options: She could eliminate Olga Nikolaevna. In the camp, accidents happened constantly. She could blackmail her. She had enough compromising material. But she chose the third way. At night, she came to Olga Nikolaevna's barrack alone, without guards. She sat down in front of her and said, "Let's speak openly. Do you want my death, or do you want to improve the prisoners' lives? Because your complaint will lead to the first, but certainly not the second." The conversation lasted until morning. What exactly Maria said remained a secret. But in the morning, Olga Nikolaevna burned the complaint. Moreover, she publicly acknowledged the necessity of a unified management system. In return, Maria included her in the barrack council, giving her voting rights in decision-making. The autumn of 1934 became a turning point not only for Maria, but for the entire system she had built. By that time, 7 women's barracks, nearly 5,000 people, were already under her informal control. But the very scale of her power became her curse. In October, the thing everyone feared, but kept silent about, happened. A special transport arrived at the camp, the wives and daughters of executed commanders of the Red Army. Among them was a woman who overturned all of Maria's conceptions about the nature of power and survival. Anna Petrovna Vorontsova, the wife of an executed corps commander, Comcorps, mother of 3 children who were taken from her upon arrest. Anna Petrovna did not cry, did not complain, did not seek protection. She simply looked at what was happening around her with so much contempt, and at the same time understanding that even the experienced common criminals averted their gazes. On the very first night, a group of common criminals approached her. The standard registration procedure for new arrivals. Anna Petrovna didn't even move. She just said, "My husband was shot because he refused to sign false testimony against Marshal Tukhachevsky. My children were sent to the orphanage for enemies of the people. Do you think you can still scare me with anything?" Something in her voice made the Blatny criminal women retreat. It wasn't fear. In the camp, no one feared the desperate. Rather, it was the understanding that before them stood a person who had already been through the worst this world could offer. Maria watched this scene from a distant corner of the barrack and understood. Someone had appeared who could challenge her power not through force, but through moral authority. Anna Petrovna did not begin to fight for power. She simply began to live by her own rules, ignoring the established system. She didn't pay taxes to the common fund, didn't participate in the common work, didn't recognize the authority of the barrack council. But at the same time, she openly helped other women from her transport, shared her last piece of bread, taught them how to survive, supported them morally. Maria found herself in a trap. To use force against the widow of a hero commander meant losing her moral authority. To ignore her meant showing weakness. And then Maria made an unexpected move. She went to Anna Petrovna with a proposal that shocked the entire barrack. "I know where your children are," she told her quietly. Anna Petrovna flinched for the first time. Hope flickered in her eyes, immediately replaced by suspicion. "How do you know?" Maria pulled a folded sheet from her breast, a letter from a supervisor at the orphanage 300 kilometers from the camp. The same Gromova, whose daughter Vera had saved, had connections there. They are alive. The eldest, it's true, has already been sent to the FZU, Factory and Plant Apprenticeship School. But the 2 younger ones are still there, and I can organize correspondence. Unofficially, of course. Anna Petrovna was silent for a long time, then asked, "What is the price?" "No price. But please think. You can fight me and the system I've created. That is your right. But this system is the only thing that allows those like us not only to survive, but also to help others, including finding out the fate of our children." The first letter from the children arrived 1 month later. Anna Petrovna's youngest daughter wrote in clumsy letters, "Mama, we are alive. We are being fed. I am learning to read." Anna Petrovna cried all night for the first time since she had been in the camp, and in the morning she came to Maria and said, "I do not recognize your power, but I recognize the necessity of what you are doing. Let us work in parallel." Thus, a dual system of leadership emerged. Maria controlled the common criminals and most of the politicals. Anna Petrovna, the wives of the military and party members. They were not friends, but they learned to cooperate. And it was precisely this cooperation that saved many when disaster struck. December 1934. A typhus epidemic broke out in the camp. It started in the men's zone but quickly spread to the women's. Official medicine was powerless. Medications weren't arriving. Doctors were afraid of getting infected. The sick were simply isolated in a separate barrack, which quickly turned into a morgue. Maria understood that if the epidemic was not stopped, thousands of people would die. Vera and her assistants were doing everything possible, but without medicine and normal conditions, it was a fight against windmills. And then Maria decided on a desperate step. Through her channels, she learned that in a nearby town, at a military warehouse, a large batch of medicines was stored, including treatment for typhus. The warehouse was guarded, but not very strictly. Who would steal medicine in peacetime? Maria devised a plan that was pure madness. She proposed a deal to the camp chief, Sergheevna, who by that time was already completely dependent on her system for maintaining order. The plan was as follows: to organize the escape of a group of women, who would, in fact, break into the warehouse, take the medicines, and return. Officially, they would be punished with the isolation cell. Unofficially, they would save the camp from extinction. Sergheevna refused categorically at first, but when his own deputy fell ill, followed by several guards, he relented. "If even one doesn't return, I will shoot you personally," he warned Maria. 5 women were chosen for the operation. Among them was Varia, the girl Maria had saved from violence. In 2 years, she had transformed into a fearless fighter, ready for anything for her savior. The group was led by an unexpected person, Anna Petrovna. The former wife of the corps commander knew military warehouses, guard protocols, weak points. The escape was organized during a blizzard. The guard didn't notice the hole in the fence, missed the absence of the 5 women at roll call. The group set off through the taiga toward the city. 30 kilometers through waist-deep snow, in 40-degree frost. 2 women nearly froze on the way, but Anna Petrovna forced them to walk, almost carrying them on her back. At the warehouse, Maria's contact was waiting. A former prisoner released on disability and staying on to work as a civilian employee. He led the group through the hole in the fence, showed them the necessary hangar. There were many medicines, but they could only take a limited amount. Anna Petrovna made the decision to take only what was strictly necessary to combat typhus. The return journey was a nightmare. The blizzard intensified, visibility dropped to a few meters. The group wandered through the taiga for almost a whole day. Varia got frostbite on her toes. Another woman lost consciousness from hypothermia. Anna Petrovna, the fragile intellectual, showed an iron will. She drove the group forward, not letting anyone stop and freeze. When they returned to the camp, they were indeed sent to the punishment cell for show, but the medicines were handed over to Vera. The secret treatment of the sick began. Officially, people were dying of typhus. Unofficially, they were recovering and being transferred to clean barracks under other names. The epidemic was stopped, but the price was terrible. Varia lost 3 toes to frostbite. One of the operation's participants died of pneumonia 1 week after returning. And, most importantly, the NKVD found out about the operation. Not the details, but the very fact that something unusual was happening in the camp. In the spring of 1935, a special NKVD commission arrived at the camp. Not a routine check, but a real investigation. It was led by an investigator for particularly important cases, Major Karolin, a man with a reputation for finding enemies of the people, even where there were none. The first thing he did was to summon everyone who held any position in the camp hierarchy for interrogation. But he didn't start with Maria. He left her for last. First they interrogated Anna Petrovna, then Vera, then old Matriona. Each interrogation lasted for hours. Karelin was a master of his craft. He knew how to find contradictions, catch minor details, twist words. But the women held out. They had coordinated their testimonies in advance. Each one knew what to say. Yes, there is an informal structure of mutual aid in the barrack. There is no criminal conspiracy. No. We just help each other survive within the limits of the camp rules. When Maria's turn came, she already knew all the questions Karolin had asked the others. But the investigator understood this too. So he started with something unexpected. "Tell me about your husband, Sergeev." It was a blow below the belt. Maria hadn't spoken about her husband since her arrest. "He is dead," she replied curtly. I know. Carolyn nodded. Shot in 1932. But before his death, he gave testimony. Do you want to know what he said about you? Maria was silent, but Carolyn saw he had hit a nerve. He took out a file, opened it. Your husband confessed that you were aware of his anti-Soviet activities. Moreover, that you helped him. That doesn't warrant 10 years, but execution. Why weren't you shot immediately? There was no proof, Maria replied, trying to maintain her composure. Karelin smiled. Now there is. Your activity in the camp, creating an anti-Soviet organization, sabotage, links with criminal elements, enough for the capital punishment. It was the end. Maria understood that Carolyn wasn't bluffing. He really could fabricate a case. But here the investigator paused and added, however, there is a way out. Become my informant. Regular reports on everything that happens in the women's zone, about moods, conversations, plans, and I will forget about your husband's testimony. Maria raised her head and looked him straight in the eyes. I agree, she said calmly. Carolyn was surprised. He had expected resistance, negotiation, at least hesitation. But I have conditions, Maria continued. I will only report on real threats, escapes, riots, crimes, not about conversations and moods, and no names, unless there is a real crime. The deal was struck. Maria became an official informant for the NKVD, but she used this position in her own way. In her reports, she did indeed inform about escapes being prepared, but only those doomed to failure, about conflicts, but presenting them as domestic quarrels. In effect, she was shielding her system with an official status. 1 year passed, then another. Maria's system strengthened and expanded. By 1937, the entire women's zone of the camp was under her control. 12 barracks, nearly 8,000 people. She had created an entire clandestine civilization with hospitals, schools for children, workshops, even a primitive library. Well, in 1937, the Great Terror erupted. A flood of new prisoners poured into the camps. Executions became daily. Carolyn himself was arrested and shot as an enemy of the people. The new leadership recognized no agreements. In the autumn of 1937, Maria was summoned for a new trial. The charge, creating a counter-revolutionary organization in the places of detention. The evidence, her own reports to Carolyn, which were now interpreted as an admission of criminal activity. The sentence was predetermined. Execution by firing squad. On the night before the execution, the entire camp did not sleep. 8,000 women stood silently by their barracks. They did not revolt. Maria had forbidden them. They simply stood and were silent. This silence was more frightening than any scream. At dawn, Maria was taken out to the execution wall, but something incredible happened. The new camp chief, Colonel Smirnov, canceled the execution at the last moment. Why? Perhaps he feared the consequences. Maria's death could have triggered a riot. Perhaps he received an order from above. Her system was too efficient to be destroyed. The sentence was commuted to 25 years of hard labor. Maria lived in the camp for another 15 years. She was released in 1953 after Stalin's death. By then, tens of thousands of women had passed through her system. Many survived only because of the mutual aid structure she created. After her release, she settled in a small Siberian town, worked as a librarian, and died in 1972. But her story did not end with her death. The women who went through the camp told their children and grandchildren about the Queen of the Zone, who created an island of humanity in an ocean of inhumanity. About the fact that even in hell, you can remain human. About the price of power and the price of survival. About the fact that sometimes, to save many, you must dirty your hands, and about the fact that history is not divided into black and white. It is composed entirely of shades of gray, like the morning fog over the camp where 8,000 women silently saw off the one who had become their hope, their protection, and their curse all at the same time. Why is this story important today? Why, decades later, do we return to it again and again? Perhaps because it raises questions to which there are no simple answers. Modern psychologists, studying human behavior in extreme conditions, call this moral trauma. When a person is forced to commit actions that contradict their basic values for the sake of survival. Maria Sergeyevna went through this every day for 21 years. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your decision determines who gets an extra piece of bread and who starves to death, whom to protect from violence and whom to sacrifice for the sake of maintaining a fragile peace. This is not a choice between good and evil. It is a choice between bad and worse. In modern ethics, there is the concept of dirty hands, situations where any action leads to a moral compromise. Maria lived in a world where clean solutions simply did not exist. To save one girl from violence meant endangering dozens of others. To collude with the administration, to betray ideals, to not collude, to condemn hundreds to death. It is easy to judge from a comfortable armchair, with a full stomach and a roof over your head. It is easy to talk about principles when your life isn't hanging by a thread. But what happens to morality when basic needs are not met? When the survival instinct drowns out the voice of conscience? Maria created a system that worked. Imperfect, cruel, but functional. In a world where chaos and death were the norm, she created a semblance of order. Yes, this order demanded victims. Yes, it was built on compromises. But the alternative was not paradise, but an even greater hell. Modern researchers of totalitarian regimes note, in a system based on the destruction of human dignity, survival itself becomes a form of resistance. Maria did not fight the system openly. That would have been foolish. She created a parallel reality within the system, where people could preserve at least the remnants of humanity. Did she have a choice? Could she have done otherwise? These questions have no answer because we cannot go back to that barrack. We cannot feel that hunger, that fear, that desperation. We can only try to understand. Maria Sergeyevna's story is a mirror reflecting our own fears. The fear of finding ourselves in a situation of moral choice without a right answer. The fear of discovering that our principles do not withstand a collision with reality. The fear of finding out what we are capable of for the sake of survival. But it is also a story about the strength of the human spirit. About the fact that even in inhuman conditions, people are capable of compassion, mutual aid, sacrifice. About the fact that power can be an instrument not only of oppression, but also of protection. About the fact that sometimes the greatest heroism is simply helping another person live one more day. The Queen of the Zone. It sounds almost romantic, doesn't it? But behind this title lie 21 years of daily moral torture. 21 years of balancing between life and death. 21 years of bearing responsibility for thousands of fates. Maria Sergeyevna died in her bed, surrounded by books, in the small library. It is said that in her final minutes, she was smiling. Perhaps she had finally forgiven herself, or perhaps she understood that forgiveness is a luxury she could not afford. We will never know. But we can remember not to judge or justify, but to understand. To understand how fragile the boundary is between human and beast, how relative our absolute moral standards are, and how important it is to cherish the world where we are not forced to make such a choice. Maria's story is a warning about the consequences of systems based on dehumanization, about the price that ordinary people pay for experiments, about the fact that evil does not always have the face of a monster. Sometimes, it forces ordinary people to become monsters to one another. Thousands of women stood silently that night when Maria was supposed to be executed. They did not shout, they did not riot, they simply stood. In this silence, there was everything: gratitude and curse, love and fear, acceptance and condemnation. This silence said more than any words. We remember who you are and what you did. We cannot forgive, but neither can we forget. And perhaps this is the only honest assessment of her story. Neither hero nor villain, a human caught in inhuman circumstances, who did what she could, what she deemed necessary, and for which she paid until the end of her days. A queen who never wanted her crown. A power that became a curse. A story that offers no simple answers. And a lesson we must remember so that we never repeat it.